Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the final session of the FPSO World Congress 2020 Day 1. Thank you all for staying with us throughout the day. For the final session, we have Vincent from Energean, who will be speaking a little bit more about the Karish-Tanin FPSO. So Dave, can I invite you to come back on to introduce Vincent to the audience? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jamie. Yes, the final session of the day. It's been very busy. Somehow it seems busier than the physical session we had a year ago in Singapore. But appreciate everybody that's been joining in and hearing a lot of good messages about how people have been demonstrating resilience in the face of the challenges of both COVID and the oil price. So our last session today, Vincent Havul Sals, the project director, Karish-Tanin FPSO from Energean, will talk to us. He's an experienced engineering and development manager active in upstream and oil and gas for more than 15 years. He graduated from École Centrale Paris and got a master's in petroleum engineering at IFP school. Spent 10 years at the start of his career with Shell in the UK and Dutch sector, and then worked with in Kashagan between 2010 2013 before he joined Energean in 2014, and he's followed through with a series of assets with them, where he now leads the Karish gas development, which took FID in March 2018, and they've been doing the entire facility scope under the execution by Technip FMC under an IEPCIC, which was a new acronym for me. So I'd like to introduce you to Vincent and hear what he has to say. Vincent?
Yes, hello everyone. I'm very pleased to join you. It's a bit of a new style of a conference, but I'm very glad to attend for the second time the FPSO World Conference. I will share my screen and we'll get started. Right, so I think everybody can now see. So this is going to be a 15 to 20 minute presentation. It's a bit difficult to talk about being on time, on budget in the current crisis. This is a global pandemic, there is no doubt about it, and our industry and our specific project, Energean, the Karish gas development, is affected by it. This is more an opportunity for me to retouch base with the community. Last year, we spent quite some time together explaining the benefits of an IEPC contract with Technip, linking from wellhead all to delivery point in one contract with an industry leader such as Technip, and the benefits of a gas FPSO, one of the first ones of its kind. We will touch upon some of these benefits later today. What I wanted to do this year is to actually use this project as a study case for the COVID effects. As you may remember, our hull was under a subcontract by Technip to Sembcorp Marine, and the hull was manufactured in COSCO Zhoushan. We have our topsides in Singapore at Admiralty Yard, so we are a typical FPSO affected from China into Singapore, and let's hope not in Israel, although Israel is a quite affected country in Europe and in the East Med. So it's more of a testimony than a lecture. I hope you find it interesting. I'll give you a brief introduction to Energean, a summary of the Karish gas development, so that you see a bit, you remember what who we are and what our project is like. We'll talk about our main achievements in 2020. We'll have a bit of a focus on the schedule, more than the cost, quite frankly, and how the COVID has affected us, and we'll close with some main takeaways on how to best manage the situation. Right, so Energean targets to be the leading independent E&P in the East Med. It came out of nowhere. In 2007, acquired assets in northern Greece, and until 2016 did an IPO in London, and became an emerging regional player with acquisition of production licenses offshore Israel. Our strategy is to focus on reserves and grow our position in a very prolific new basin, which is the Leviathan, the Levantine basin. We focus on growing production, and Karish is one of our main assets that will contribute to this. It's very important for us to stay gas focused. We want to be a company of the 21st century, and we prefer targeting dominantly gas assets. As you can see, the follow-up statement is to focus on our emissions and be best-in-class industry and resilient cash flow. That's also a side benefit of the gas, meaning that our gas prices are largely fixed with fewer and fewer ties with the Brent, and this has proven to be a very stabilizing factor for us this year. This is to give you some numbers and some evidence of our growth on our reserves. Since 2016, you can see that we started with Greece, added Israel, Karish and Tanin blocks, worked our reserves, drilled. We made a discovery in Karish North, so you see a significant jump here. And more recently, we have confirmed the acquisition of the Edison upstream portfolio. So this is a very significant reserve-based growth that should allow us to finance a number of projects and assets for the next 50 years, if not more. This gives you a bit of a feeling of where we are implemented regionally. So we are heavily focused on the East Med region. With the acquisition of Edison, we have now a strong footprint in Egypt and Italy and UK as well, as Edison had made significant discoveries in the UK that we've acquired to date. You can see that our portfolio is dominated by Israel with an equal play between Italy and Egypt. The Karish gas development is a complete greenfield development, very high productivity wells, up to 300 million scf per well. So a simple SPS, very standard products from Technip, a single manifold, 2 steel catenary risers in multi-phase, a spread mode FPSO. The spread mode is doable in the environment where we are, which has very strong directionality from the west. So that's good. We didn't have the complexity of a turret, and a dual riser balcony to just have more space for future growth, with an export straight to the beach and a connection to the grid. So we're treating all of our oil and all of our gas on board the FPSO and sending directly market quality domestic gas. You can see that these assets are quite significant here with a 600-ton manifold. Energean will resell all of these assets that I'm circling here, the Tanin manifold, the nearshore and the onshore, to INGL, which is the local gas transportation company, which sees this infrastructure as strategic for them, as it offers them an opportunity to export. So very good start for Energean in Israel commercially, with a very good deal with INGL. So a good partnership approach, simple subsea, and one of the first of a kind gas FPSO. Our main focus was to minimize technical execution risk, limiting interfaces and pushing all of our infrastructure on the boat and as little as possible on the land. Enable external investors, which is just what I've told you about INGL, and the ability to accommodate organic growth with large riser balcony capacity, allowing us to tie back several fields. So the main value driver of our presence in Israel, material reserves, an EPC contract of 1.4 billion with Technip that covers wellheads all the way to the delivery point. Some pre-sold gas contracts that de-risk us largely on spot price fluctuation and on Brent. A significant contribution to a domestic market. Israel, we will supply about 40% of Israel's need, and the market is still growing very fast. Israel is living a complete energy transition from old coal and oil to cleaner gas, which is a very good thing for them, and I would say for the region as a whole from an environment standpoint. And it is fast. Which maybe renewables would not be able to absorb such a shift in fuel base. We own fully our asset. We chose to be a long-term player, so we didn't go for leasing solutions. This should give us a good, strong position when further monetizing our presence offshore. We're the first floater in this area. As you can see, we're surrounded by gas discoveries. There's Aphrodite, there's Noble Energy, you've got the Cyprus players who are just 90 kilometers away. And of course, we have Lebanon, which is an area to further deepen our knowledge. Our main achievements in 2020. So this is just a brief overview of the FPSO, so that you are familiar. So we have special security features on the boat. We have about 45 megawatts of Siemens turbines. We have some layouts that you can see that are available for future growth. We've got our high pressure multi-phase system on starboard with the ability to hook up additional risers. We'll start with just two. On the port side, we have the export balcony with also ability to grow, debottleneck our export to Israel, and why not create a new export route to Cyprus or potentially Turkey. Tandem offloading with a reasonable parcel size, not too big, not too small neither. And we have an LQ with a POB of 120 and an ability to expand to 145. Which we will use for sure during the hookup phase. This is what the boat looks like. So the hull, this is the hull leaving China on the 3rd of April. It was at COSCO Zhoushan. It made its voyage to Singapore and arrived on the 15th of April in Singapore. And as you know, on the 17th of April, the yards were shut down. So we were not very lucky. We left China thinking it was the wise choice, knowing what we knew of COVID in late January, February, and we arrived in Singapore under almost a complete shutdown and lockdown. This is what's happened in the past few days. We finally managed to start our lifting campaign on 24th of August. Started with the E-House. With the pipe racks, LQ, and the other topsides that we commenced by mid of September. You can see that the modules are all finished. Most of them have had a full mechanical completion. Scaffolds are down and ready for erection. There's another image of the lift. You can see we're still offloading a bit of equipment. These are riser protectors. But in essence, we've spent a lot of time inspecting the hull to have a better input of physical progress when the hull arrived from China and entered into the construction sequence of the Singaporean yard. A few words on subsea. I'll come back to it. We've had a very busy first half of 2020. With a 90-kilometer pipeline laid by the Solitaire of all seas, significant operations onshore to support the pipe pulling and the preparations for pigging, and we've installed all of our SPS. Very good window. We operated from April till currently. These operations took place in May and June. Very challenging times for COVID. I'll talk a bit about that. So here the challenges are a bit different than in a yard in Singapore. They are largely to do with mobilization of large workforce and making sure that you don't lose the ship. You've all seen a lot of news around even military gunships who had COVID cases, and they very quickly escalated. You remember the cruise ships in Japan. So it was not easy to handle COVID at sea neither. More recently, in July, August, we've installed all of our permanent mooring systems, so suction cans. There's 14 of them. They are quite large. They're about 20 meters in height and 9 meters in diameter. So that was quite an important success. And we currently are finishing the mooring line pre-installation. Very good performance, good waters in Israel, offshore Israel. In summer, it doesn't move much, so very favorable environment for installation. This gives you an overall an overview of where we are from a contract point of view. So we have a total contract of about 1.4 billion. In gray, you have the contractual planned withdrawal of the monies by Technip based on the physical progress and the completion certificates. In red is where we are and where our forecast is. In black, you have the true physical progress, whereas here we're talking of money. So you see that we still have a physical progress that sits around 82%, while we've withdrawn and committed to payment to Technip around 70%. So we still have about 10% of buffer, let's say. And you can see that we have an overall delay of roughly 6 months. Now, this mixes FPSO and subsea. If we look a bit at the subsea, we see that we shifted the sequence from winter to summer, which was very good, and now we're on track, and we're going to be on schedule as of November, December 2020, and then we're going to just flatten out and wait a bit for the FPSO to arrive and perform the hookup. It's very good performance on the subsea. And on the FPSO, well, it's a bit less cheerful. We can see that from December 19 till March, we had a very flat, so almost no completion certificates were signed. That's largely to do with the lack of oversight as well of supervision. Sembcorp, Technip, ourselves had very limited access to Fushan during the Chinese part of the COVID, which is still ongoing, but more or less, I would say January to March. From my perspective, and then we finally sail away, so that allows us to make some payments to Technip, but we enter a very desertic period, which is the shutdown of Singapore and the difficult ramping up. What's clear to me is this is the area we need to focus on. There's a very long flat period you can see during the whole Q4 of this year where we're struggling to make milestone certificates. So this is what we have to focus on now is how can we sequence the work so that we enable our partners, Technip, Sembcorp, to also achieve payment milestones. That's an important aspect. Cash cash positions are difficult for yards especially. And it's important to try to not be in a period where basically over 6 or 8 months, there's no cash being paid. All right, I'll talk to you now a bit more about exactly what happened from a schedule point of view and the resource. I'm conscious that sharing resource levels of a specific project in Singaporean yards is maybe touchy, but I reject that approach. I think as developers and producers, owners of future assets, it's very important for us to share information. It puts pressure on the yards, it puts pressures on the regulator, it ensures that people are fairly treated. So I would share with you in full transparency all of our resources that we have achieved to date. So we'll start with the resource in China. We left. We were supposed to leave in December of 2019, and we chose, and Sembcorp and Technip largely chose to stay a bit longer to reduce the carryover work. So we entered January with a plan that you see here and shaded, with 900, 700 workers, a bit of a flattening during the New Year's Eve of China in January, 600, and then a build up to 900. That was the plan, leaving on the 3rd of April. In full color, you see what we've achieved. And I think the first thing to say is it's quite remarkable the way COSCO has managed at Zhoushan the manning levels during the COVID crisis, managing to maintain a good 600 worker, which meant that we only had 10 to 15% of the man hours that were not performed versus our plan, resulting in a modest carryover work increase. What did happen as well in Zhoushan is that very quickly our Sembcorp supervision, our main supervisor at Sembcorp, was not present on the island and could no longer fly to Zhoushan. Technip was heavily affected, with about 5 or 6 people left out of plan 12. But Sembcorp was the big missing element, where a supervision team of 30 to 40 was expected, and we ended up with 0. So that meant that COSCO managed almost in autopilot to perform as much work as they possibly could during this period, and we're quite grateful for that. It helped us make a decision mid-February, so around this point, seeing the lack of supervision and the modest carryover work that we would increase if we would accelerate the departure, we decided to maintain the departure date, and we instructed the hull to leave as quickly as possible Zhoushan to go to Singapore. And at the time, we felt that Singapore was possibly a safer place, well regulated, with possibly less COVID exposure. Now, as you know, this is not quite what happened. This is what happened. So now we are in Singapore, Admiralty Yard. I can't read very well, but this is more or less the resource plan. So first thing that happened, we arrived on the 15th of April, and the Sembcorp Yard shut on the 17th, 2 days after our arrival. So that was a bit of a drama. We didn't see it coming, and I'm sure that a lot of the people listening in today didn't quite expect such a rapid shutdown. At least when we sailed away from China, we had seen very, very little effects of COVID into Singapore. When the yard reopened on the 2nd of June, and this is what this profile is showing you, this is the histogram of resources we've achieved at Admiralty Yard for our specific project. So it's not the total resources at Admiralty Yard, but just for our project. And you can see that really the reopening of the yards on 2nd of June is a bit of an inconsequential event. I mean, we were literally with an average of 50 workers on a yard, not being able to do much. So we did what we could. We offloaded, and of course, we started a very thorough inspection program to better understand the condition that the hull had arrived in. So that was useful, but it delayed a lot our ability to start true works for the lifting sequence. All right, so then we can see that the ramping up really started around the 10th of August, and we are now into a very positive phase. What you can see is that it started a bit in the end of July, and then we had a resurgence of COVID cases. 5 or 6 is enough to slow down the ability to ramp up, especially on dormitories affected by the AY2 workers, AY2 being the topside type of workers. So we're currently estimating around 3.8 months that have been lost due to COVID in Singapore, versus an official 1.5 months of yard shutdown. So I think the main takeaway for me here is it's not really the yard shutdown that's been the most brutal for us. It's really being the ability to man up that's affected us much more. Typically, it's 2 times bigger the effect. So we're in a positive trend now in August, and we hope that it's going to last. This was Technip's best estimate in March of the resources we need to complete the project and sail away in January 2021, and that was without COVID effects in Singapore. So you can see that there was a rush to rapidly close the carryover work in blue and a steady ramp up on the integration and pre-commissioning commissioning phase, about 10 months sequence, and a period of about 44 months at 1800, and a swift ramping up of the carryover work. Now, of course, this is not really what we've achieved. You saw the resources of the past 3-4 months. And the big question is, what are we going to be able to do with our partners, Technip and Sembcorp and the Admiralty Guard people against this target plan? Now, here there's a bit of numbers. You can see a bit the key milestone dates that are in our contract. We are supposed to arrive in Singapore in January, and we are supposed to sail away in October 2020. Prior to the COVID crisis, we had to absorb about 3.5 months of, let's say, natural project delays. So that's what Rev 22 is about. It shows you, excluding COVID, where we were at. So we are a 36 months project. I think Yossi mentioned that in the opening session this morning. So that's very correct. We are a 36 months program. And we were at around 70% completion with a cumulative delay of about 3 months, which I think is well, it's not better than zero, but it's achievable. Then you see a bit the additional effect of COVID. So here I've tried to segregate a bit. So using the column here, which is our latest. So we start lifting 28th of August, and we expect to sail away in July next year. So we've added 5.5 months. So we have a total delay at the moment of about 9 months, which is a mix between, let's say, pre-COVID delays and COVID-related delays. So we are exactly in the situation which I think most players are in, which is a mixed bag of pre-COVID and post-COVID delays. And it's going to be very difficult and challenging to commercially manage that between all the bodies, and we have to trust one another and work as collectively as we can to try to deal with these events fairly. So here you have a couple of statements. So about 8.8 months of delay on the final milestone, roughly 3.5 pre-COVID, 5.2 due to COVID. What you see happening here is a bit worrying. I wanted to highlight it. So while we have 3.8 months of delay on the start of the lifting campaign due to COVID, we then see that if we look at sail away, it's 5.5. So there's a temptation from our yards, contractors, if you want, to possibly inflate a bit the COVID effect. Now that's very risky. That's something that's sensitive. We have to trust one another. Now, some of it is due to the increased carryover work that we saw from China that I touched upon, but it has to be done within measure and with an open book. So that's an important message. So it's just to show you how we monitor it. So these variations are sensitive and cause commercial tension. There is a temptation to inflate the effect of COVID over the obligations to recover pre-existing delay. So this is a very blunt statement to say what everybody knows. The COVID will not be the excuse to throw everything under the carpet, okay? But how are we going to distinguish it? Well, we have to realize that it's going to be very hard. And so when things are hard, you need to have a good, open, and trust relationship, because else you will not manage it through conflict. The level of resources is fundamental. However, it's largely dependent on the Singaporean authorities. What we found out is that there's no real point bashing our yards or Technip. The reality is that we've moved into a bit of a planification of the economy, and at least of the marine sector, where each project, each entity receives a certain amount of workers, and then you can hang on to them. So this is actually a good thing. It means that it's not a big market throwing money, and essentially the developers being potentially hijacked. Once the resources are secured, it is unlikely that they will be lost to another project. And so we think, Energean, that incentivizing on labor rate is not really the right approach to catch up these delays. What we think is much more promising is a natural shift to night shift work and paying fairly the cost of acceleration to the yards and to our contractor. Another important point is the challenge on productivity. So productivity is always an important factor of any yard, so that everybody knows. But we have to all recognize that this distanciation and the COVID measures are potentially going to hamper our productivity. So you need to be very careful on what measures you want to proactively put in place to boost your productivity, anticipating that COVID will affect it. And we need to also put in a framework where we can identify the cause of poor productivity. If the cause has got nothing to do with COVID, then there needs to be a fair punishment, let's say. So you need to focus a lot on that. We spent all these months of June and July, which we had, to reflect on that and see how we could diminish the effect that COVID will have on the yard productivity. I'll close with this last slide on the main takeaway. So our immediate reactions in the situation that I've outlined. So we've tried to accommodate cash flow policies using the milestone payments. So milestones often have criteria. Criteria can be a bit moved around. It depends. When you have a major equipment that's sitting in a harbor ready for shipment in China, you can sign it and not be adamant that it should be in a Singapore harbor. So things like that. We have done that with Technip. Technip have done that with Sembcorp. I think it's important to do it, to say, to send the message, we're in this together. And the reality is that the yards are possibly the most affected from a cash flow point of view. While we have our loans and have our financing in place, we are more resilient at this stage of the project. HSE preparation and sanitary compliance at all levels, fundamental. Everybody on that yard has to play the same game and comply with the same rules. It's to everybody's advantage. You can imagine how bad it would be for Energean to be the cause of a shutdown of our own yard. So commercially, it makes complete sense, and HSE-wise as well. We have to promote an honest dialogue and frank dialogue on the future extension of time claims that are, of course, boiling up. What we can do is to not focus too fast in the EOT discussion and really try to focus on short-term goals. So for us, it's the lifting. Yeah. So right now we're letting people sharpen their arguments, but not at the detriment of the short-term goals. What we've done as well is we've promoted engagement at CEO levels between Sembcorp Marine and Energean to reiterate commitments and make people feel comfortable. I think that's useful. It's a soft aspect, but it's important. On the FPSO specifics, we have maintained our project team untouched. So no firing, no part-time, kept it together. And we've promoted a rapid return to a common office, whether it's the yard or if it's a transition office. The reality is that I personally, and in Energean, it's not too much in our DNA, we're not big fans of work from home. So as quickly as we could, we tried to bring the team back together for obvious efficiencies and collaboration reasons. We've maintained our inspection capabilities. So instead of reducing, we kept our experienced people, especially the people who came from the hull in China. And we took the hit financially, but rapidly we found 50-50 kind of deals. And that allowed us to restart very quickly on the hull carryover work inspection in June. While there was nobody at the yard, there were our inspectors, and we were able to better diagnose our starting point. I mentioned that I think the night shift pattern is an effective recovery measure, probably one of the most that I can foresee at the moment. And it has the beauty of being very COVID resilient, as it will allow a natural segregation between workers. And we have decided to not further delay our ramping up of ops personnel, even if we're into an 8 months delay. We've already, of course, adjusted the ramping up of our ops, but now we're into this last 10, 12 months. We have to bring our ops people there, and we expect them to boost our pre-commissioning commissioning phase. One word on the Singaporean authorities. They have a pivotal role in managing this COVID crisis, almost more than the yards themselves. We've placed our trust in Singapore and in Sembcorp for this scope of work. We see them as an advanced regulated environment, and that's also why we pushed to leave China. We're confident that Singapore can manage prudently and effectively the COVID crisis, avoiding a second shutdown. It's really this is the principle that the Singaporean authorities have laid out. We're fully on board with that. But we have to be effective in the ramping up. June and July have been lost, it has to be said. And we need to prolong this ramping up now that we've started in August. Also, one important role is Singapore authorities have to ensure that the developers are treated fairly by the yards, and that the numbers that that project get are in proportion to their importance for the Singaporean economy. So that's important, that we don't get blackmailed between Exxon, Energean, BP, etc. For what is a man-constrained environment. And I think Singapore can play a role in that and have more or less in their strategy. Then a last word on subsea. So the subsea COVID exposure was largely managed by Technip. That's a benefit of the integrated EPCIC. We didn't get hit on the FPSO, and on the same day receive tons of claims by all of our subsea installers because we have only one Technip. Now that's very good, and I would say that if you look at FPSO projects, I think the integrated nature for a small emerging company between subsea and FPSO has been hugely beneficial. And of course, I have to praise a bit the competence of Technip on the way they handled the first 8 months of offshore operations. Very good planning, a good mitigation plan culture. So whenever something happens, we're ready for mitigation plans. And we have been, Energean, much more able to support Technip regionally in our home hopping between contacts like Cyprus, Israel, Greece, to assist Technip. This is something that's a bit harder for us to do in Singapore. But I wanted to touch on the fact that subsea we've been resilient to COVID. Voilà, that's the few words I had to share. If there's any question, or if David, you want to follow up, I'm all yours.
Thanks very much, Vincent. Now, we're afraid we've run out of time. I'd like to invite people to follow up with you with questions they might have. But thank you very much. A good real-world example of the real struggles and trying to balance the various decisions you made to mitigate the challenges of COVID. So thanks very much, Vincent. Cheers.
All right.
I want to go ahead and give some closing remarks. Thank you. It's been a long day. It feels longer than the actual physical presence a year ago in Singapore. I think that's because the clock keeps ticking. But it's been great. We've heard a lot of positive statements from our presenters today. Real challenges have been met. Resilience has been demonstrated. Yeah, there are some real impacts, but I like some of Vincent's points about don't just use COVID as an excuse. You have to face up to your own responsibilities, and it looks like they're doing that. So that's a good role model for some of the other companies that are facing the same challenges. So I'll hand back to Jamie, and look forward to seeing everybody again tomorrow morning.
Thank you very much, Dave. I mean, I do agree with you. It feels a lot longer than we would have at the Marina Bay Sands in Singapore. But once again, ladies and gentlemen, we have now come to the end of day one, and I hope you have found these sessions insightful. You've learned a bit from our speakers, and you have managed to make new connections via the virtual exhibition booth and meeting hub. Now, the virtual exhibition booth will remain open till 9 p.m. Singapore time today, so that's an additional hour for you to continue exploring the booths and to continue networking with people. In the meantime, the FPSO World Congress Live 2020 will resume at 3 p.m. sharp Singapore time tomorrow, and we look forward to welcoming all of you again. Stay safe, take care, and see you tomorrow.